All right. Welcome to the Ultimate Divorce Survival Guide. My name is Luke Sauter, and I'm the president and CEO of Vidarrow Investment Advisors, a registered investment advisory firm headquartered in Arlington Heights, Illinois. A little bit about me: in addition to being an investment advisor representative, I'm also a certified public accountant and personal financial specialist. With that, I'd love to jump into it. So I'm joined by Mike Cohen from Michael's Mediation. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your business and your journey?
Cool. Hey, first off, thanks for having me here, Luke. This is great. I founded Michael's Mediation, and I'm a divorce mediator. It's something that I'm very passionate about. I went through a divorce myself. I saw the litigious side of divorce, and I saw how negative it is for children primarily. I knew I had the ability to mediate, and that's why I had a passion project to get involved in this. It's turned into more of a business than a passion project, but I like to work with families. I have worked with some couples who don't have children, really to get them through the divorce process more amicably. I know we'll talk more about it, but it's a passion of mine to help people because this divorce doesn't have to be a bad process. It's a terrible process to go through, but it doesn't have to be as bad as you see in the movies and you think about.
100%. I mean, it's got to be one of the most trying and stressful experiences a person will ever live through, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is. I mean, when you get married, obviously everybody has great dreams and hopes and visions, and that's a tough thing to pull away from people. And especially when children are involved, it gets very complicated from an emotional and parental perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And that's why I'm really glad to be here because your help and what you do is really important to families.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. And that's a good segue into my why. So I founded Vidarrow really for a simple reason. I want to be able to help people. As I thought about it, life is really complex and it's becoming increasingly complex. And the challenges that people face are becoming harder and harder. If you're a dual income family out there and you're trying to get through the grind every day, or if you're a corporate executive trying to get through the grind every day, the pressures that you feel are absolutely immense, both in terms of your own professional career, but also maintaining those interpersonal relationships. And then when you add financial well-being on top of it, really, like, who has the time, right? I mean, it's just so hard to keep it all together. And so, my sincere hope is that Vidarrow will be here to be a partner for people, help people through some of those key life moments, and also bring just a little bit of peace of mind, which, I'm finding since I've founded the firm, universally everybody is craving. Part of what we bring is an element of comfort that doesn't otherwise exist if you're not working with an advisor. So I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm, happy to talk a little bit about this because it is such an important moment in somebody's life to go through. So maybe we could just start with the process itself. So for somebody who hasn't been through a divorce, what would you say is the biggest misconception about divorce?
Probably I'll give you two of them. The first one is just the cost and the control. Like, a lot of people believe that divorce is expensive, and it is. A lot of people empty their savings. A lot of people can't afford divorce because when you use a lawyer-led process, in Illinois, the average cost is $17,000 a person. So that's $35,000 for a family, and that's for the average. So you could imagine a more contentious divorce or divorce with more complicated assets that could get very expensive if you litigate. The other part of that is the control. A lot of people who follow a lawyer-led process feel like they're going to have control of the process, but they really don't. The lawyers drive the process. The lawyers talk to the judge talks to the lawyers. You are basically a pawn to stand there and listen and follow what the judge tells you have to do. You have very little control. And one of the things that frustrates me, because even though I focus on the family, I've got a CPA, I understand the finances. Judges and lawyers don't understand the finances, and they make decisions on complicated financial instruments without full knowledge of taxability and capital gains issues and other aspects of it. And sometimes they just make easy decisions, and it's very frustrating to have that done. The other thing I would share is divorce is hard financially because you've got generally two incomes or one income and one home, and then you go to the same income and two homes. And most people are living paycheck to paycheck. Most people are just getting by. And when you add a second mortgage or a second rent, and nowadays with the interest rates and the rental rates being really high, it's really a kick to the gut. And most people don't understand. It's really, really difficult for both spouses to be able to support themselves, support their kids, and live the same lifestyle.
It's a really tough moment to be sure. And, I think as you enter the process, you're going to spend some money to dissolve the relationship one way or the other. I think one of the things that I love about the business that you started is, in my mind, you've created an opportunity for somebody to spend that money more wisely, more efficiently, and hopefully end up with an even better outcome. For those of you that don't know Mike or that haven't known him for as long as I do, he is genuinely one of the nicest people that I've ever met. And having lived through it himself, I know he's got this very personal why, and he can certainly help you through it. What I would say is what you just described there, though, is assuming everything goes smoothly. But we both know if you're going through a moment like that, tension is high, emotions are high, the ability to communicate effectively, which essentially means move things along swiftly, not very high. And, to your point about our lawyer friends, the meter is running when you go through a lawyer-led process. And so as inefficient as it can be, that really plays to the attorney's advantage because the meter is running and they're billing. And so, if you can find a way outside of that process to handle some of the toughest issues, the most complex issues, and arrive at a meeting of the minds ahead of time, you can probably save quite a bit of money on the legal side of the house. And so we'll get into that in a little bit. But this idea of mediation, for those that are not familiar with it, why don't you talk us through a little bit? What is mediation and how does it end up ultimately being a lower cost and more humane process?
Sure. First thing I'll say is, I talked about the average cost of a litigated divorce in Illinois is $35,000. Mediation is 10% of that. So it's extremely cheap. So I usually don't like to work with couples who just want to save money. I really want to work with couples who want a good outcome. So I always say that the most stark difference between litigation and mediation is the cost, but that's not the reason you should do it. So mediation is where you work with one unbiased facilitator, which is the mediator, versus each spouse hiring a higher priced attorney to represent them. So right there, you could understand why having two lawyers in every meeting and every discussion who charge at a much higher rate is very expensive versus having one lower cost individual guiding them. The mediator does not make decisions. The mediator just understands all the decisions the couple has to make. So in a very collaborative process, the mediator helps tee up questions and guide the couple to make decisions. And frankly, 70% of a divorce process is the parenting plan if you have children. And even if you litigate, when you go into court, the judge is going to tell you, find a mediator, mediate your parenting plan, because they don't want anything to do with that. The parents know their kids best. The judge doesn't know your kids. They don't know your family. So you're going to have to mediate 70% of it anyways. And what I found is when people start to mediate, it's really cool because like most of my clients, like I hate to say it, we joke around, we smile. I see people look at each other and I ask them questions they hadn't thought about and they build their parenting plan together. And it's really rewarding to see them work together. When we pivot and start working with the finances, then they've built a foundation to have healthy discussions and do things the right way. So the basic overview of mediation is you're making all of your decisions yourself. You're doing it in a collaborative way. You're working together. And it's much less expensive. It's also much quicker. So in mediation, you could be done in 2 to 3 months. And the impact of that, Luke, is if you have children and you're going through a litigated divorce, it takes 1.5 years or longer. You're told not to talk to each other about your divorce unless your lawyer's with you. And that's done for a good reason. They don't want you to agree to something that's not in your best interest.
Right.
But you could imagine the tension and the stress for that 1.5 years. And the kids are smart. They see it, they feel it, they hear it. Whereas when you mediate, you get through it in 2 or 3 months. Your mediator's encouraging you to work together. So the kids aren't seeing and feeling and hearing that stress. And then in 2 or 3 months, you're both on your own path to start moving forward. So it's much healthier for the children.
So if I'm just kind of keeping track, and I do want to come back to one point, so it's much more cost effective, but you threw a stat out there. I think you said almost 10%. So if we're talking an average in the $35,000 range, and even if it's 15,000, let's say it's somewhere, it's tens of thousands of dollars. It sounds like for 3 to 5,000 somewhere in there, you can be well on your way with mediation. That's huge cost savings to the unit when it comes to distribution and division of assets. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. And
Yeah.
think of the costs that a couple has for their children or even just furnishing their new home. I mean, why give it to lawyers? You can work together, make your own decisions, and save,
Yeah.
$20,000 to $30,000 that'll help you both as you take your first step outside of your marriage.
Yeah, and as the investment advisor, I would say I'm not going to do the exact math, but if you take that 20,000 and invest it at 5%, 20 years from now, that's real money. And so it's a big deal to be able to generate that kind of savings, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. It's great. I
Oh,
love it. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so then the other thing that I'm kind of hearing is it's much more I'm describing it as humane, but it's a healthier way to go through it. Now, for people that are watching this, they might, have a lot of different circumstances that could be unique to them. And so one question I know I have as a curiosity is, how do I know if mediation is right for me? So what I thought I'd do is maybe just kind of lead the witness here a little bit. Let's start with, a scenario, for example, maybe you have a spouse that had sort of an unsanctioned relationship, cheating, let's say. Is that a scenario where mediation can be helpful?
Um, it could be. Let me,
Yeah.
I'm gonna probably make this a little bit easier, and I'll tell you the
Yeah.
four areas or the four pillars that
Yeah.
have to be met in order to mediate. So
Okay.
um, in a lot of cases where you don't think mediation can work, it does, and I've seen it work. So in order to mediate, you have to be able to talk to each other. You
Okay.
have to be able to listen to each other and hear what you're saying. You
Okay.
have to both have the desire to compromise, and you both
Yeah.
have to be transparent and fair. So in a case that you just brought up, if somebody had um, an affair,
Yeah.
if it's fresh and raw, they might not be able to listen to each other. They might not be able to talk to each other, and they certainly may not want to compromise. But if it was something that they've dealt with and time has passed and they're still not happy about it, but if they're starting to work together for the kids or they want to do what's best for them and they could commit to talking and listening and compromising, then mediation could work.
And if somebody's on the fence and they're just not sure, maybe emotions are still very high, maybe things are still fresh. Is it worth trying it? And what does it look like? Am I out as the person $5,000 if I try it and it doesn't work? Walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, every mediator has a different practice. Like for myself, I don't charge a retainer. So I just have clients pay as they go. So certainly it's worth trying because my consultations are free. And then even if they just do one session and they find out it's not worth it for them, it's just a 1 hour fee, which is not a lot of funds. So I think it's always worth trying. I always tell couples during my consultations, you should always start with the easiest, less expensive, healthiest option, and then escalate if you can't make it work. So the easiest
Yeah.
way to get divorced is to do it yourself. Not everybody can do that, but if you're recently married, you don't have children, your finances aren't intertwined and very complex, you could do it yourself. If not, mediation would be the next step. And then if you can't mediate, there's a practice called collaborative law. And then if you can't go through that, you go into the litigation where you each hire an attorney and go to court. So
Okay.
I always encourage people, start with mediation. It's not a big cost investment. Most couples, once they get into it, they find this is actually relatively easy. Like, let's just keep going.
I'm curious, do you find with your clients that in a way they find it therapeutic as they go through it too? Are they able to release some pent up emotion as they go through it?
Um, Yes, I'd almost phrase it a little differently. I think it
Yeah.
builds a foundation for future co-parenting
Okay.
because they're building plans together. Um, there are couples that want to rehash the past in mediation, and you could see right away that it's a trigger for a reaction. And every mediator is a little bit different, but I might let a
Yeah.
little of that out, but at some point I have to tell them, hey, I'm not a therapist. We're not going back in time. We're here to take a look at how you guys can move forward. So
Okay.
try not to go backwards because that's counterproductive to coming up with good decisions.
Okay. So then sort of like the filters, right? Could mediation work for me? It sounds like if you think that both of you can be reasonable, and if generally both of you are interested in moving forward right out of the gate, there's a good chance that mediation could be for you. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
really does. I mean,
Okay.
the cases I know there are some cases where it doesn't
Mm.
work. Like if
Yeah.
it's an abusive relationship, some narcissism is a big topic in divorce, but some
Yeah.
people who just want to view life the way they do and aren't willing to come to the middle and compromise and hear others,
Yeah.
that's not going to be healthy either. But I've had some very contentious couples who got through it. So
Okay.
I would say probably for 8 out of 10 couples, it's an option.
Okay. So if the criteria is reasonable and wanting to move forward, once I get into mediation, then are there any topics as you go through the process that are either just too big or too complex to handle in mediation? So, like as an advisor, one of the things that obviously is top of mind on the finance side is distribution of assets.
Mhm.
So maybe you could just talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, that's where you and people like yourself who could provide insight and intellectual input into those processes is so valuable because usually in most relationships, most people gravitate to what they're good at. So um, one person might be great at being handy around the house. One person might be good at cooking. I'm just making things up, but one person might be the financial expert in the house and they drive all the decisions. By default, the other person may not have a knowledge of what's out there, how does it work, how does it benefit me, how does it grow, can I retire, can I even live month to month? So for couples where you have that kind of division, the person who doesn't have that knowledge definitely needs some financial guidance during a divorce.
Yeah.
So there's so many topics that come into play. Um, Probably the first, and I'll probably phrase it like before, during, and after divorce.
Okay.
So before divorce, you have to be organized, you have to understand your finances, and you kind of have to have a feel for the impact the divorce is going to have on your monthly budget. So do you understand your cost? Do you understand your income? Do you understand what child support and alimony might do to you? Do you understand where you're going to be able to afford to live um,
Yeah.
based upon all these changes that are taking place? Um, During divorce, what you said is the division of assets. I mean, that's a big topic,
Yeah.
and most people don't consider the tax implications. So whether it's an IRA or a Roth, or if there's capital gains, what type of taxes might you have to pay on the house if you sell it? What type of closing costs are on a house when you sell it, and who should share in those costs? So that's where a financial advisor could come in.
Yeah.
Along those lines, a lot of people don't think about liquidity. They just think, I want half. Well, you might need more liquidity than you think,
Right.
or you might want to set your retirement up.
Yep.
Because you're not going to be able to grow it as much into the future. So there's a lot of financial planning that really is beneficial. And then after divorce, it's really the retirement planning. Like how do I make sure I could, live month to month? How can I save? How can I get to retirement? Or am I just going to be working the rest of my life?
Yep.
So that kind of planning is invaluable.
Yeah. I find that people oftentimes also don't necessarily have the ability to see around corners with things that could be lurking. And so, an example I would give on the tax front, right? So nobody likes a tax surprise, but the reality is, the IRS, the tax code, it favors filing as a married person. So if you're married filing jointly, the tax code is much more favorable than if you're filing single. And to just hammer that home, so something very simple. So let's say, and this is an illustration I did right before this. So let's say you have one person in the relationship, they're the breadwinner. Let's call her Sarah for the sake of the discussion, fake person for the record. Sarah, let's say, makes $400,000 a year, so does very well in her career, right? If she's the only breadwinner, if she's the only one bringing in income, all else equal, moving from married filing jointly to single, her tax bill will go up about $23,000 on a federal basis. And then when you layer in state taxes, it could be even more. It could be another $2,000 or $3,000. So just there, we're talking maybe $25,000 in tax exposure that could be a surprise if you're not expecting it. And that's just one small piece of the overall financial journey when you're going through mediation. So there really is a lot to cover off. And if you find the right mediator, somebody like Mike, he can help coach you through that. And so maybe let's talk about that for a second. How do you sort of steer people through the financial aspects of a mediated end to their relationship?
Well, there's two big topics that we have to start with. So before I look at financial divisions, alimony or spousal support, it's the same thing. We have to look at that first because, at least in Illinois, that's an input to child support calculation. So when it comes to spousal support, we have to look at their relative incomes. We have to look at whether the guidelines suggest there should be alimony, because in Illinois, there's a cap that the person who earns less money, when you take their income plus the alimony, it can't exceed 40% of the cumulative total. So right there, there's a reason some people fall out and it doesn't apply. But then once you get past that, there's a dozen different factors that courts take into account with alimony. From I gave up my career and raised the kids to I'm sick and I can't work, or I have a job and I can support myself. So you have to talk through that. And to get to that point, what I do is I work with their monthly budgets. I encourage people to put together accurate monthly budgets, and we look through to make sure, the way I phrase it is, you both want to support a home that each of you are comfortable, that your kids are comfortable going to. So you don't want to win so much in the divorce, and I hate to say that. You want each parent to have a home that's comfortable for your kids. So how do we make sure that we can do that in the best possible way? Once we're done with spousal support, then we look at child support. That's formula driven. Courts generally don't want to change that a lot because they don't want to take money away from kids. So it's a little bit easier. And then once we get done with that, we go through the financial divisions. Most of my clients don't have the complex financial instruments that you might work with in your office. But so mine are a little bit easier, but occasionally I come across a middle to higher income client. And that's where I really advise them to work with a financial advisor, because the tax implications, the liquidity, the planning is really critical.
Yeah, 100%. Even just that decision on what to do with the home, right? So are we selling the home? Are we keeping the home? Are we, as one of the spouses, are we renting a new place to live in? Are we buying a new place to live in? That in and of itself can drive massive impacts, because oftentimes the home, whether you're well-to-do or not, that can be the single largest asset in a couple's sphere, right?
Yeah, and it's really tough nowadays because nobody wants to give up their 3% mortgage,
right?
And nobody wants to pay high rental rates. And most couples come back to me and they're really depressed. They're like, I got to pay more to get less. So it's like, but I'm really glad they're mediating, because in some cases there's something called a deferred buyout, where you don't have to share the equity on day one, because when you look at your home equity, it's a big chunk. And I usually go through this where I go, all right, so the equity is this. You don't have to agree on 50-50, but if you did, do you have $100,000 in your mattress or in your drawer? Most people don't. So you either have to refinance or you're mediating. If you could be super amicable, we could keep both names on the mortgage. We could write it up so the spouse who's leaving isn't encumbered by that loan when they take out a new loan. And we could set parameters for when that equity is paid out, either when interest rates drop or when you sell the house, when your children leave their current school district. So there's a lot of options there. The house is definitely the most complicated. It's not complex, but it's a complicated decision.
It's a complicated topic for a million reasons, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about this idea of cohabitating? So, when you think about just raw cost, if somebody leaves and they go and they have to buy another house or they have to go and rent another apartment, it drives cost across the two. Is cohabitating something that is viable this day and age?
It's done more often than you would think before the divorce is final.
Okay.
And in some couples, they agree to do it after the divorce is final. It's called, formally, I think it's called bird nesting. I've referred to it
Okay.
as nesting. And the aspect that I like about it is it teaches the parents to have empathy for what the kids are going to go through, because the kids stay in the house and they can
Yeah.
either cohabitate or they rotate in and out, where
Okay.
where they take turns, and then the parents have to decide what to pack and what their schedule is, and the kids stay there. So it teaches the kids to appreciate, I'm sorry, it teaches the parents to appreciate what the kids are going to go through when they have two separate homes. Um, but it introduces so many different elements, like how do we agree on maintenance of the home, who pays for repairs, who stocks the groceries, who does the laundry, how do
Yeah.
we stay out of each other's hair.
Relationship expectations, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But nowadays it's very common to have that. Most people don't agree to it, but it's a common discussion because it's very difficult to buy a home at the interest rates that we're in right now.
And well, you can save a lot of money doing it this way too, right? And so when I think about some of the most devastating cost drivers in a split up, housing costs is certainly something that drives a lot of cost. Also, the splitting of retirement accounts. So, whether people have 401ks or 403bs, I would imagine that's a common topic you come across too. Maybe you can talk us through just for a minute or two what that process looks like when it comes to mediation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, retirement accounts are a marital asset. So unless you earned it before your marriage, which most people in a long-term marriage, they started working and accumulating those funds while they were married. So it's a marital
Yeah.
asset, but it's in your own name. So a lot of couples don't understand that. They're like, well, that's my account. Like I earned that. That's with my employer. That's my name on it. And
Yeah.
I give them a heads up that that's actually a marital asset. And then we have to look at whether it's a Roth or an IRA, because one's taxable and one isn't.
Sure.
And we want a fair division. And then there's an additional cost because sometimes you have to hire a lawyer to do a QDRO, a quadro, to move those funds without incurring taxes or penalties. Yeah, it's depressing sometimes because people are looking at their retirement, and it hurts when you have to take a big chunk and move it
Yeah.
from one account to another.
Oh yeah, it's a painful moment. So, and the quadro is the qualified domestic relations order, I think.
Yep, yep.
Okay. So there we go. So, I get calls all the time. I'm curious to get your take on this. And it goes something like this, where it's, I'm in the middle of a divorce, or I'm about to divorce, I'm contemplating divorce, but my spouse handles the money, and maybe there's an advisor, maybe there's not, but the advisor is like my spouse's person. It's my spouse's advisor, and I'm a bit in the dark on this. And so in those scenarios, I'm curious, do you ever see those? And then, what do you encourage the spouse who doesn't have the advisor to do? Because as we're sitting here talking, I'm just thinking, really this is a large exercise in expectation realignment. People are going to have different goals leaving the marriage than what they had when they were within the marriage. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny you should bring this up. I
Yeah.
recently working with a client where the husband worked for Merrill Lynch and he managed the money, and the money
Okay.
was his baby's, and he
Yeah.
just assumed that he would be managing the money after the divorce.
Yep.
And said, "I'm divorcing you. I don't trust you. I'm getting a new money manager."
Yeah.
So fortunately, I was able to connect her to somebody that I thought would be a really good fit, and it worked out really well. But yeah, that's I think you hit the nail on the head, though, that after divorce, your goals, your risk tolerance, everything changes. So your portfolio needs to change. You need somebody to look at it for your position post-divorce, which is very different than when you're in a more comfortable financial position of two incomes in one house.
Yeah, when things are on the tracks in the day to day, it's easy to just forget about this stuff. But at some point, in this moment, you do have to sort of tackle it. And that's where I think having a trusted advisor becomes really important. And to that point, what I thought I'd do is just share with anybody that's watching. There's typically 8 to 9 questions that I would encourage somebody who's going through a divorce moment to ask. So I thought I would just kind of throw those out. That way, if people are considering hiring an advisor or working with a mediator, they have some things that are maybe top of mind that they should be asking about. So the first is, do you expect to receive or pay alimony or child support? Because that'll change your financial situation. Is there a plan that's needed to divide assets and liabilities? We talked a little bit about that. What's the plan for housing? We covered that. Health insurance is a big one. So are there any issues with health insurance coverage? Were you covered by the spouse's employer? Do you have to obtain new coverage? Do you know how to do that? And so on. Are there any life insurance policies that need to get reviewed, updated? What about the estate planning documents? What do the trusts say? All of that. Certainly, if children are involved, the plan for that. How long did the marriage last? Right? So if it lasted for 10 years, that's a different answer from a Social Security standpoint than if it lasted for less than 10 years. And then just in general, like, will there be any tax impact during the year of the divorce? And so what I would encourage everybody to do is, find somebody who you trust more than anything else, whether it's a mediator, a financial advisor. Vidarrow is a fiduciary. We're set up as a registered investment advisor, which means we don't sell products. We're fee only. We really only recommend what's in a client's best interest, and we're required to do that by law. So, find somebody like that. There are plenty of fiduciaries out there. Feel free to give Mike or I a call, and we can help you out. We've covered a lot of ground here. I think it's been pretty close to a half hour. My big takeaways are, divorce doesn't have to be quite as painful. Mediation can be a really healthy path, a less expensive path to get through it, especially if you have a good mediator, maybe somebody like you, Mike. And so, I want to thank you for your time. It's great to see you, man. I hope that we can do this again sometime. And any parting words for the audience before we head out?
No, I think you said it all, Luke. I mean, I'll just turn the tables on you too. Just having known you for a while, you are also one of the most caring and nicest people that I know. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you because this is really good information. Litigation is what gives divorce a bad name. And if you go through it thoughtfully and amicably with the right professionals by your side, it could actually be a very healthy process that helps you both move forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I'm going to do my best to have some links when we post this, but check out Michael's mediation in Lake Forest, I think it is, Mike, right? Okay. And feel free to check out Vidarrow Investment Advisors. We're out of Arlington Heights. I hope you guys found this informative. And Mike, thanks again for all your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke.
Take care. Yep. Bye-bye.